I would now like to introduce the former member of Boston City Council and author, Mr. Larry DiCara. Larry.
Great, thank you very much. As someone who was on the city council for 10 years, I've given plenty of speeches, never done so on a Zoom call internationally, and I'm really honored to participate. And I will give a brief synopsis of our city government and how it fits into uh, the governments of the states. You know, the United States is 50 states, and each of them has their own systems which provide for various options for municipal government. In some of the southern and western states, there are more city managers, then there are mayors. The pendulum swings back and forth. Massachusetts, which is a state of 7 million people, more or less, has 351 separate cities and towns. Boston is the biggest. It's almost 10% of the state, about 700,000 people, and has been a city since 1822 and has had various forms of government, some of which I lived through, some of which I read about, some of which I helped to bring about change. And once again, the pendulum also swings back and forth as to whether one wants a smaller city government, a larger city government. How do we involve the average citizen? So beginning in 1822, Boston had an elected mayor, and believe it or not, the mayor was elected for a one-year term. And then we had a bicameral form of municipal legislative branch where we had a so-called common council and a board of aldermen, not unlike the United States and the states where you have a Senate and a House. And that form of government was in place till about 1909. And there was a lot of people who went to jail for corruption, and there were a great reform movement that simplified city government and made it an elected mayor, a so-called strong mayor under our system, and a city council of 9 members elected at large. And these elections happened every 2 years. And at some point, the mayor was a 4-year term. The city councils were 2-year terms. And they also, when they changed the system back in 1909, made it nonpartisan. So that at that point, Boston was probably 50-50, Democrats and Republicans. And we only really have 2 political parties in our country of significance. And they did away with parties. So that when I ran, I'm a Democrat, proud of it. When I ran for the city council, the fact that I was a Democrat was not on the ballot. It was a nonpartisan election. And the system had all 9 councils elected at large until 25, when they divided the city into 22 districts, which we call wards. And then you had 1 elected from each of them. And then in 51, they changed the system to 9 at large again. And that's the system that I was elected and how I served. And I thought went relatively well, except it did not represent all the geographic areas of the city, some of which are connected by tunnels underwater, and some of which are a little bit distant. And I led the fight to make it a hybrid system with 4 elected at large and 9 from districts of approximately 75,000 people. Been that way since 1983. It's permitted a much more diverse city council. I joked when I made a presentation like this that our diversity initiative was we had 1 city councilor who was a Protestant and a Republican, and everybody else was either Irish or Italian. That's changed dramatically. The council is now majority women. It's majority people of color. They come from all sorts of backgrounds. and it works relatively well. Some cities in other parts of the country have much more powerful city councils than Boston does. Boston is a so-called strong mayor form of government. And this year, they are beginning a more democratic budget process, such as appears to be the case as you've had in Paris, and appears you're very democratic in Manchester as well. And we'll see how that goes. Those of us who study history, we had a lot more democratic systems, and maybe they didn't work so well. Maybe this time it'll work out fine. We are at this point a very prosperous city with a strong tax base. And when one has, in our case, about $100 million additional revenues every year, that provides an opportunity for the democratic instincts to help provide new programs. And we are dealing with homelessness, just as Andy mentioned, as are most of the great cities of the world. I encourage the discussion to provide an opportunity for every different aspect to be heard. I would encourage you not to make it a complicated system, and democracy can work quite well without being complicated, in my opinion, and make it clear in writing as to which group does what, because sometimes that is unclear. And in Massachusetts, we have all sorts of different kinds of government. I tend to think that strong mayor government works the best. And that's despite the fact that when I ran for mayor, I didn't get elected. And I would love to be a strong mayor. And when I was on the council, obviously, I wanted as much power as I could get. I legislated all sorts of things. And it also depends upon there being men and women of goodwill, people prepared to give of their time, to understand that it's a civic duty and a responsibility. And I think good people of all shapes and sizes, all political viewpoints, will stand up and participate in whatever government you create. And I'm more than happy to respond to questions about anything that I may understand from the point of view of how we govern in Massachusetts and across the country.